Okay, y'all. I'm not gonna cap. Not gonna cap. I'm gonna just say Raw was decent. You know, Raw had about the same appeal as, a 1998 episode, a really good episode of Sunday Night Heat. That's about the quality level Raw we got. So it wasn't horrible, wasn't the worst Raw. It was a decent Raw. Like if we got this type of Raw every Monday, we could say Raw not garbage, but it was straight. One thing I think the biggest thing is the fans. Yeah, Seth Rollins. He emerged out of a sea of masked men. And I really hate this gimmick, this masked man nonsense. Because if that's the case, all of those masked men could just beat up the Vision. And Seth would have his revenge, but the creative team are bankrupt. Now, you get the Vision, you get Adam Pearce saying like, hey Seth, you gonna hurt yourself. You're not medically cleared if the Vision beats you up. Then what? This is really horrible. Like, I don't know what to say with this no more, but I thought it was kind of cool when Seth, he blended in and they caused chaos and he got away. That was cool, I guess, but the crowd chanting, I don't know if they were chanting "This is awesome" or they were chanting "Holy shit." It was one of them, and I was like, y'all are impressed with this. So if the crowd is impressed with that, I see why they're spending 35 grand on tickets to WrestleMania. Like, the crowd was genuinely impressed with that. Like, is that how garbage wrestling has gotten when the crowd sees 15 masked men and they chant, "Holy shit, this is awesome"? Is this what WWE has become, man? Like, come on, man. This crowd is trash. Then you had the gauntlet match. I'm not upset with the gauntlet match. To be honest, I'm not upset. The gauntlet match was okay. Wasn't the best, booking we ever got, but I mean, it was okay. I'm not mad at it. I'm not about to go over every little thing. But it's hard booking because you want Bayley to go to WrestleMania. Bayley was underutilized, but I mean, Bayley, you did get, a Royal Rumble win and you became women's champion. So, it's time to put over other talent, but I get it. Like, we want Bayley to go to WrestleMania. Like, I get it. We don't want to give it to Io because Io's already over. With or without the championship, Io's over. Asuka, she had the title, the tag titles and stuff. And Asuka, she could be a transitional champion, but you want to keep her prestige. A lot of people sleep and forget that Asuka is like one of the best. So if Asuka gonna eat a pin, she could eat it to Bayley. And you don't book Ivy Niles properly. That's why Ivy Niles can't, she can't get the pin on Asuka. And she can't get the pin on Bayley because you didn't book her right. But, this would have been the time to do it. She got the pin on Io, but that didn't mean anything because Io already was taken out. I really feel like you should have let Asuka or Ivy Nile win this. You know, but then you're like, okay, we're gonna have Ivy Niles versus AJ Lee at WrestleMania. You know, they book themselves in a corner. So now you have face Bayley versus face AJ Lee at WrestleMania. You know, I'm sick and tired of this face versus face nonsense. Ivy Niles is a good wrestler. AJ Lee, she's a good wrestler. You know, she got some ring rust. That's fine. But you could have let them just have a banger of a match at WrestleMania. And you could have built the story, because that psycho stuff that AJ Lee does won't work on someone like Ivy Niles. Like that craziness, like that won't work on her. Have AJ Lee drop the belt to Ivy Niles and give her some legitimacy. That's how you book that. What good is it gonna do for Bayley to fight AJ Lee at WrestleMania? There's no story. They can't even develop a story. It's going to be the I respect you, you respect me nonsense. Now, Bayley's, you know, messed up in the head and AJ Lee's messed up in the head. So now you have both characters doing the same exact gimmick for WrestleMania. Way to go, doofus son-in-law, Triple H. You know, and I really don't want to go segment by segment, but, you know, Penta had his match with one of the El Grandes, Ludwig Kaiser. And the only good thing about this match was Penta hit a springboard. I don't even know the name of the move. I'm drawing a blank. Springboard Mexican Destroyer, that's what it was. And that looked cool. You know, that was like a 10-minute match with like 3 commercial breaks or something like that. I mean, God, like, come on now, man. Like, come on, bro. Now, the biggest thing everyone's going to be talking about, the biggest thing is going to be the Judgment Day betrayal of Finn Balor. Now, you know, I get it now. Like, I kind of get what they had to do, but it was a wrong way about going about this. You know, the segment was good because Rey Mysterio, Finn Balor, I mean, you got to look at the Judgment Day. You know, a lot of people call them jobbers, but they're not jobbers, okay? The people that's in the Judgment Day been here for a while now, and all of them got good mic skills, and all of them can wrestle. So they pulled this segment off pretty good, okay? They pulled this segment off pretty good. Now, this story, what they're gonna do is basically, I guess, say Finn is out of the Judgment Day because JD clearly picked his side. And that's what I didn't really understand. You know, I thought it was going to be Dominic and the 2 women just be their own faction, and then you're going to have Finn and JD kind of together. But nope, JD chose Dom. Now, what I think would have been more powerful, you know, if Dominic had the Intercontinental title. But I think what should happen now, because Dominic doesn't have the Intercontinental title, and I guess that's why you gave it to Penta on a random Raw. Which, man, they could have done that at Elimination Chamber. You know, why didn't this happen at a pay-per-view? I have no clue. But I think what should happen at this point, Dominic has that AAA title. Finn, you know, should make Dominic lose that title, because Dominic isn't going to defend that title on Raw, for AAA. So whenever Dominic defends that title, Finn should make him lose it. Now Dominic has no title. Finn is all alone. And now he has to take out, the two members of Judgment Day now. The two men. Now, what they may do, I don't know if they're going to do this, but Danhausen pretty much cursed Dom. So maybe Judgment Day runs into Danhausen, beats him up, or something like that, and then Danhausen and Finn fight, JD and Dominic. That might be something they do. I mean, they have a lot of time, and this feud needs to end at WrestleMania, or at least, build up to WrestleMania, and have a stipulation, man. Like, have some kind of stipulation. That's why if it would have been for the title, if they would have booked it right, it should have been for the Intercontinental title. But I guess it's going to be a grudge match. At least it's one of those matches that's not I respect you, you respect me. Because Finn basically turned face tonight. At least that's what I'm thinking. Finn turned face. Because hell, ain't no way Dominic, turning face. But essentially, Finn is a face now. Then, last but not least, and I'm going to skip over this. Basically, Kofi invited Javon Evans to join New Day. I do not want Javon Evans in New Day. Javon Evans needs to be nowhere near New Day. Now, if Javon Evans turned heel, maybe he could be in New Day. But Javon Evans is a face. He needs to be doing face stuff. He's over with the crowd. Essentially, Javon Evans really needs to be the Black Jeff Hardy. That's really what he needs to be. I would have Javon Evans. I would honestly keep doing what I'm doing with Javon Evans. I would have him jumping, doing stuff in AAA, doing stuff on Raw until we can find him a good story. And basically his story is rising up. He doesn't need to go after no tag team gold. Javon Evans basically could actually go for the IC title, but right now Penta has the IC title, which he's a face. So until Penta sort of runs through the heels, or until Penta loses it to a heel, Javon Evans in this race to get the IC title, he can't get that. Now, can Javon Evans actually go after World Heavyweight Gold? Yes, there is no problem that he can't go after it. Honestly, I would rather have something where we throw Javon Evans in that world title picture, but he would just get squashed. I would do that. I would let him, what do they call it, get that rub. After all this Mania stuff is over with, maybe some kind of way he ends up, I can't say fighting Roman or Punk, because it's face versus face nonsense. But maybe we let Javon answer that Brock Lesnar challenge, and maybe not no 50-50 booking, but maybe 25-75. Brock just can't keep up with the bounciness and stuff like that. You know, just make him look good. Let Javon sell. Let him get squashed. You know, let it be a squash match, but maybe a 5-minute match instead of a 2-minute, match. And, last but not least on this segment, you had... Oh, I forgot. Obafemi and Rusev had a good match. That's how you do it. That was actually a good match. Good for Obafemi. Good for Rusev. Honestly, they could run it back if they wanted to. If they wanted to, they could run it back. I would not run that back right now. I wouldn't run it back right now. It was fair and square. Two big men, fighting, power moves. Obafemi looked real good. Rusev looked real good too. We know Oba had to win. Rusev is time to put over people. That's the thing that WWE right now doesn't want to do. You don't want to bury Rusev, but Obafemi, Obafemi has to win this. If they're going to go for Obafemi versus Brock, Obafemi has to be doing these squash matches. Now, Obafemi just did, this wasn't a squash match, but he won in a good way. Obafemi looked powerful, and we know Rusev is powerful. But now, who do you throw at Obafemi besides Brock Lesnar? That's why I don't know if they're going to run it back or what. Obafemi versus Sheamus. Obafemi versus Otis. Like, is that what we doing? Not too many big men. You don't want to can't throw Javon Evans at Obafemi, but, maybe Obafemi squashes. I don't know. Look, I don't know. I don't want to see Obafemi versus a jobber anymore. It's time for legit wins. Obafemi could, he could beat a lot of people. Raw just needs some more heels. That's all. But then last you get to the Usos confronting Punk, for disrespecting their family, right? Which, this was a good segment. This was a good segment. It wasn't too much Punk mic skills and the way Punk could actually, formulate things. We thought he apologized and he didn't and stuff like that. Jey Uso's hot. The biggest thing what I want people to take away from this, they're not coming here due to Roman. But it seems like you might get a OG Bloodline reunion, maybe. Just maybe. And it's, to me, the Bloodline, the OG Bloodline was always the heels. A lot of people don't want to admit that, but they were the heels. They were always, they could call it cheating or what. They were cheating. It's the point of the faction. That's why you have a faction. They help you win. But Punk don't have nobody. So when you got the Usos and Roman, you going at it with, he ain't apologized. Was that their lick right there? To punch Punk and that's it? So it makes you want to tune in next week. That's what Raw is supposed to do. Make you want to tune in next week. So, it was a good segment. We just have to figure out, is the OG Bloodline back? You know, and I mean, they got the tag titles. You know, so I don't know what they're gonna do. You know, I have no clue what they're gonna do. You know, are they fighting a vision or what? Like I have like they're just holding on these belts. These belts should be for someone else. I don't know. But like I said, this Raw was not bad. You know, if you come online and you see people just saying, "Oh, this Raw sucks," you know, I'm gonna just keep it real. This Raw was decent. Was decent. You know, it was like a 1998, 1999 exclusive episode of Sunday Night Heat. With Sunday Night Heat, you know, you had Kane and X-Pac dominating Sunday Night Heat for a long time. You know, they probably tried to do really good because the Road Dogg left and they going to gaslight everybody to say, oh, you know, it was Road Dogg. You know, we could cook now. No, you're being forced to cook. You know, but it won't last long. This is just the Mania build. SmackDown still has a lot to go. So we just going to see from here. You know, it was a chore watching this still. It was a chore. You know, this is why I watch Raw 30 minutes later. You know, I'll let Raw come on for about 30 minutes just so I can skip all of those commercials. And I can skip the dumb segments, skip some of the dumb promos. Like, I'm not watching Stephanie Verkir promo, man. That's Spanish. I'm not watching Penta promo. That's Spanish. It's like, skip that nonsense, bruh. But go ahead, man. Raw wasn't trash. It was decent. You know, 5 out of 10. 5 out of 10. Maybe 6 out of 10. Now, it'll be hard, but 5 out of 10, man. 5 out of 10 Raw. Like, comment, subscribe. Let me know. Is the OG Bloodline back?